Well, Uncle Dan.
Hey, well, yeah, hi there.
Howdy. I don't know if you know this about me and your esteemed Uncle Doug, but our dad was kind of an asshole.
Well, okay, yes,
You've told me on a sliding scale.
I was going to say you've told me some stories, and he sounds awful.
Yeah, I mean,
I believe he can be topped. I believe that the asshole nature of your father isn't the pinnacle.
Well,
of daddy assholeness.
You know, we probably should. I don't even know why I brought that up. We'll talk about
it. Seems completely irrelevant.
Yeah, we'll talk about it another time because we brought on a guest who wouldn't know anything about that. You guys, let's welcome our friend Nate Phelps to the conversation here. Nate, how are you?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Excellent. Now, if you don't know who Nate is, you know who his dad it was.
The name Phelps might be a hint.
Yeah. So Nate here is the son of Fred Phelps, who was the founder and chief cook and bottle washer and lead screamy person of the Westboro Baptist Church. That's correct, right?
I think that pretty much covers it.
Yeah. Well, I think our work here is done. So you, Nate, you are one of, I know, like you, I'm a middle child. Okay. So I get it. I understand. I'm the middle of 4, which is kind of hard to do, but it worked out. You're the middle of 13. So same, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And sixth out of 13. So.
Wow.
Sheesh.
That even Mormons go, wow, that is a big family.
Yeah. Mormons are like, dude, slow your roll.
Well, see, back in the 60s when we were out selling candy, someone would say, well, are you guys Catholic? Of course, I never understood that until I grew up. But apparently that was the thing with the Catholics, right?
Yeah. Catholics and Mormons are famous for that. And the Westboro Baptist Church, apparently. So You're in good company. So how many of your siblings are still active in the church?
I would see there are 3 that left for sure and gone, and then 1 is kind of wavering in between. So there's 9 solidly involved still.
Sheesh.
Wow. And the Westboro Baptist Church, if I'm correct, it's interesting. I told a friend of mine that you were going to come on the show, Nate, and this friend of mine had this sense that Westboro Baptists was like a huge, like, nationwide church. They get so much press that they thought this, this must be this huge thing that has congregations all over the place. That's not really the case, is it, Nate?
No, not at all.
How many members would you say the Westboro Baptists had in their prime?
Well, I wasn't there. I mean, they were claiming early on when they were doing all those the picketing that they had upwards of 100. But when I was growing up there, it was our family and 2 other families. That between those 2 other families, there were a total of 11. So we had like 25 warm in the pews every Sunday.
Wow.
Between those 3 families. And then, of course, my siblings grew up and had kids. So they were claiming upwards of 100. But I would say today, I'd be surprised if they had more than 40 or 50 because so many of the second generation has left, right?
That's crazy.
It's super weird. Like I can't believe people don't want to join.
Right?
What? No.
It looks like a ton of fun.
I'll say this. It's impressive how much noise that tiny little church has been able to make.
Yeah, it reminds me of the band Rush. Big guys and they're raising hell.
Yeah, they've raised a lot of hell. Now, I think, if you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Nate, but I feel like your family's real debut in the national media happened in 1988 when they protested at the funeral of Matthew Shepard. Is that kind of?
Was it 88 that
or sorry, 98. I
was going to say, because they actually started in 91. And you talked about that. There was that Gage Park was apparently there's a publication out there that if gay people wanted to meet, there different places they could meet, and that Gage Park was on that.
Mm.
So that's that's why he started doing it.
That was the park where there was apparently rampant homosexuality that became your father's first kind of cause celeb.
Yeah, but for those first years, it was basically a local thing. And the funny thing is, Kansas in general, and Topeka specifically, is a very conservative town. But somehow they managed to still piss people off with their message in that conservative environment because of the nature of the message. They have those nasty signs. And then as soon as anybody in public would speak out against them, they would attack them. And that was one of my dad's primary strategies, was you'd attack the individual instead of the issues, right? So, they were very well known there in Topeka and then in some of the surrounding areas. But then that Matthew Shepard passed, and that decision, because they were up and running by then with the picketing capacity, and so that's they decided to go and picket at Matthew's funeral.
Well, you described. I'm sorry, I'm going to correct you. You described those signs as awful, and I think graphic design was your father's passion. They're one of the most impressive repositories of clip art, I think, anywhere, certainly in the lower 48. But we actually have a couple of those, Nate. We got some from Shirley.
Oh, were they personalized?
No. They happened to come through Salt Lake City. I'll make the story very quick. They came through Salt Lake City a bunch of years ago, and a friend of mine who's a photographer, we went to see them because it is a spectacle, right? And he snapped a bunch of semi-professional photographs of them and offered to trade them for some of the signs. And Shirley was like, absolutely, we want photographs. So, and we have signs, so we made a trade.
That's right.
Mine says God hates fags on one side and God hates Jews on the other. You take your choice. You kind of determine who's approaching, and you flip the sign, and you're covered, right?
Yeah. Mine says God hates you, which I truly love, just because it's humbling, I suppose, to know that there's a personal God and he doesn't like me.
So you were out of the church long before the Matthew Shepard incident, right?
Right.
So for you, what was that like to watch that go down? Because it was such a huge press spectacle and it was such a high profile event, to see your family doing something that just atrocious in the national media. Yeah.
So maybe if I give a little anecdote, it'll best describe it. So after I left, I was, moved to Southern California and generally didn't talk much about this, except to, my brother Mark had also left. So we were working together. And so there was a small circle of people who knew at least some of what it was like growing up there and what he was like. And I talked to a couple of counselors about it. But one of the things that I ran into a lot was when someone said, well, why don't you talk to your family? I said, well, I don't have a choice. And generally the attitude was, well, yeah, actually you do. And I would say, well, yeah, actually I don't. And so there was that disconnect. People couldn't understand that kind of extreme circumstances, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then this suddenly showed up in the national media. And by then I was going to an evangelical free church, and I had, 5 or 6 couples that we were close friends with. And I walk into one of our meetings. We used to meet every Friday night just for fellowship. And I walked into one of the meetings and I, point to this article. And I said, see, this is what I'm talking about. It was like, finally people could figure out, okay, now I get it.
Yeah. People finally believed just how monstrous a situation you'd escaped, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I have a logistical question about the church, which is how, I know it's tiny and it's basically down to like family members now for the most part. How do they pay for this? How do they travel 300 days a year, right? And to all over the country, right? I don't understand where they get their income from.
Well, now I can't speak to this with 100% certainty because it's hearsay, but talking to some of the members who had left, they, of course, my father, you didn't have an option. You paid the tithe, which means 10%.
Mhm.
But what he would often do is when he wanted something big to happen, he would gather the congregation and he would present it as though we're having a collaboration and we're going to make this decision on our own. But ultimately, he basically said, okay, everybody's going to give at least 30%. And you got to understand, 11 of my siblings are attorneys or they've got law degrees. They've got respectable jobs. And then you've got the next generation, and many of them also have good paying jobs. So if you crunch the numbers, I remember sitting down at one point, and the money is significant when you take 30% of that kind of total revenue. They've got a lot of money that they can use to move around.
So they I mean, these are obviously, they've got law degrees and stuff, and there's plenty of stupid lawyers out there. We've seen that during the election cycle here, but these are pretty high functioning people. Yeah. So there's a professional life outside of the church. It just seems it's so all consuming that you wouldn't have time to do anything else.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's part of the marketing genius, because so much of that is smoke and mirrors. First of all, they've got that website and they tally up, if they make a phone call or if they hang a sign out the window as they're driving down the road, that they count that as a picket event, right? So they've got these picket events in the tens of thousands, and then they'll send like one adult with 3 kids. Well, the kids aren't earning the money, they're not tied to an employment schedule, that kind of thing. So they can create the appearance, and they did a really good job of creating the appearance of this really large operation that had unlimited resources, right?
That is exactly what happened here in Salt Lake when I saw them. It was Shirley and 2 teenage siblings and a couple kids. Yeah. They showed up, they had their signs, and when the press showed up and took some pictures, they evaporated. We're off to the next thing. Yeah. But in the Tribune, in our paper, when you saw it, it looked like a robust, contentious protest. I mean, you're absolutely right. It was incredibly effective. It looked like something much bigger than it was.
They all carry like 4 signs, and they've got flags wrapped around them. And it's quite a production. And then of course you have all the attention that they attract, which just makes it look that much bigger and significant, right?
That's a very good point.
Help me out with the timeline. Were you part of any of the protests?
No. By the time, because I left there for the last time in when would that have been? 76 and 81, and that started 10 years later.
And what precipitated your leaving?
That's a long story in itself. Basically, it was, I spent my childhood growing up in that environment that was extremely violent, profoundly conservative theology. Calvinism was the cornerstone of it. That idea that we don't really have any power in that decision, that God's making the decision. And I just became convinced that between the physical violence that I was experiencing and the message that I had taken in about who I was, that basically Christ was going to come back around the year 2000. So I had another 20 some years to live my life on my terms. And then I was going to go to hell. And I had accepted that, and I didn't want to be there in that situation anymore and be out of control like I was. So,
wow.
So you didn't lose your faith while you were at home because I know you left like on the second after midnight on your 18th birthday, right?
Yeah.
So you're saying that you didn't become an atheist in Fred's house. No, that happened later.
No, I can recall in retrospect that there were many times that I would, he'd be preaching on some story in the Bible and me having the thoughts, well, or it could be this, like questioning it, but you didn't dare question anything out loud in that environment because that wasn't safe.
Wow.
And another huge aspect of all this was because he spent so much time telling you why you would rebel if you rebelled. The process of rebelling was full of self-doubt. Well, why am I doing this? I'm only doing it because I don't want to serve God, or, all that stuff. That's part of that whole strategy that holds people in place in religion oftentimes, right?
Yeah. It's cult programming. You're trapped.
Yeah. And so if I'm questioning the existence of God, or if I'm questioning the conduct or the behavior of my father, it's only because, and then fill in the blank.
Right.
Because I hate God, because I'm a rebel, because I'm a heretic, whatever. Right. So that process took a long time, and actually I'm still in the midst of it, which is,
it's amazing how deep the tendrils go when they're planted so young and so hard in our brains. Right.
That's right. And there's a lot of things. I mean, it basically, it creates a worldview for you. And there's, I use the analogy of a quilt. There's just like these millions of threads running through and crossing over and interconnecting. And you don't even realize it. So much of it's in there, and you act on it, and you confront the world. And then all of a sudden one day, circumstances or for deliberate reasons, you pick one of those threads and you hold it up and you start asking questions about it. And then that starts to unravel another piece of it, or increase your understanding and your perspective on different things. Right.
Yeah. And I think Dan's right. I'm in my 50s, and my faith crisis began in Mormonism, in my very conservative, abusive family, probably a little less famous anyway than yours. And my faith crisis began because my queerness began to make itself known. So I started wanting out of the Mormon church, when I was 12 years old. That wasn't an option. It took until I could get out of the house to kind of make that decision for myself. But even in my 50s, I'm still finding landmines, right? I've kind of reflexively been an atheist. I didn't really know the term for it since I was 12, but I'm still finding this stuff embedded, because it was embedded so thoroughly. And the conditioning was so many hours a day, right, was taken up by the conditioning. So I want to ask a question that maybe is, it might be a little sensitive, and you can tell me, a little delicate. You can tell me if it is. And I've never seen anybody ask you this, but I've long wondered this. Do you think there was something about your father's sexuality that curdled him so terribly? Do you think he was externalizing a hatred of something internal?
Mark, I've heard that a number of times, suggested or and I mean, it's not like it's without precedence. There's a lot of people who are out there, virulently anti-gay, and then all of a sudden you find out that they're actually, if not gay, they're engaging in homosexual activity. The honest answer is, I don't know. I know that he was obviously very sexually active with my mom.
Yes,
she actually had 16 pregnancies, but 3 in stillbirth.
So all those kids are from the same two parents.
Same two parents, no twins. It was just year after year. For 20 years, my mom was pregnant. It seemed like,
right? Shit.
She had Irish third tuplets.
Yeah, that's right. So just staying on the basic topic of sexuality. So I know that about him. He was ferocious in that sense. He spent a tremendous amount of time, especially when the older kids started growing, into puberty and started showing interest in the opposite sex. And he had a really ugly, dark, Bible-based opinion about human sexuality.
Right.
And sometimes when he was being violent with the kids, he would aim the Maddock handle at their genitals. So take of that what you will. I don't know. I mean, it was it certainly never showed itself conclusively if that was the case, right?
It's almost like his his hatred of anything gay, queer was clearly the animating force of his life. But it sounds like there was just something about human sexuality generally that perturbed him.
Yeah, and it could have all come from the Bible. I don't know, Mark. I mean, clearly the Bible's got some serious problems with sex in general, right?
How dare you, sir?
Well, if you interpret us in a certain way, sure.
Yeah.
But he wasn't as mad about the other prohibitions in Leviticus, was he? He didn't really pick at anybody. He didn't really pick at Long John Silver's for their shrimp basket, right?
He liked his filet of fish as much as the next guy. So I don't know what to say about that.
Weird. So you then you've left the family, you got out of there, you eventually found your way to atheism at some point, and you also found your way into kind of being advocating for LGBTQ rights.
Right. And that was quite by accident, because when I started speaking, I actually had I was driving cab out here in Cranbrook, picked up this young guy one day, and he wanted to go out to the airport, and we were chatting, and I was just thinking at the time I was starting to think about writing a book. So we got on the topic of writing, and he was a journalism student, and somehow we got to this topic of fair stories in journalism, right? And so we listed 2 or 3 sources of news that we thought did a good job of it. BBC came up, and he said, "Oh yeah, I guess I just saw this show recently about this church in Kansas on the BBC."
Oh no!
And I just kind of smiled, because I'm on the highway, and I said, "I know that church." I said, "That's my family."
Oh my God!
And he's quiet, and I kind of look in the rearview mirror, and he's got that look on. I say, "Have you ever been in a situation where you hear something, and you're like, I don't know, what did I just hear?"
Yeah.
He's got that confused look on his face. So I take my wallet out and hand him my license, right? And he just freaks out for the rest of the trip, and he wants to do an interview. So anyway, the story is written in the University of British Columbia newspaper, and that turns into an invitation to speak at the American Atheist Convention back in 2009. And then that turns into more opportunities to speak. And out of that, suddenly I'm getting communication from a lot of people in the gay community. And that was an education for me. I'm having to learn on the fly about what it's like to be gay, and what it's like to experience my father's message and their behavior, and then the reactions from the broader community, which weren't all positive in favor of gays. I mean, you still had plenty of people, basically taking that middle ground. Well, I don't approve of the way they're doing it, but I approve of the message that, the Bible, right, all that nonsense. So it really raised it. And ultimately, in my opinion, did a lot of good for the gay community and for their efforts to move forward, because it really showed the ugly face.
Yeah. I think your family, in their way, as awful as it was for the people that were specifically targeted, like military families that had nothing to fucking do with anything, who, are grieving over loss. I think the toxicity and the evil of that behavior really helped move the needle. And, I think the Matthew Shepard thing helped move the needle, because he was a kid. Yep. Right. And the murder was so brutal that anybody responding like that is clearly insane.
Well, I think what's interesting about that is to your point, Nate, that there wasn't a lot of daylight between your father's views on homosexuality and that of most conservative, particularly evangelical churches. It was tactical differences.
Exactly.
And when that was kind of exposed for what it was, like, look, we don't pick it, we don't say fag, but we basically believe the same thing they do. That's an uncomfortable position to be in. Yeah. And I think he, by not virtue of any intention, he put a lot of churches in that position to have to either confront or rethink.
And just individuals, I think.
Certainly
too, right?
individuals. Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, individuals. And I would say, guys, that my experience with some close friends is we're kind of splitting hairs. Even the more liberal ultimately
that's fair.
Are going to come to the point where there's, in some way or another, they're justifying this idea that this particular group is less than me.
Yeah.
and whatever form that takes, it's still that position, and it's untenable. Even just using the word tolerance, to tolerate. To me, I don't even like the word tolerate, because that suggests that I'm better, but I'm going to put up with this lesser or this worse.
Right.
Yeah, I will tolerate the neighbor's barking dog. That's not the same as I accept your humanity.
Yeah, that I have no basis for saying that you're different than I am.
Yeah.
In your basic humanity. So
I'm curious about so you left the church at 18, and it was obviously a difficult church to grow up in, but then they blossomed into this nationally known terror group, this nationally known hate group. How did it feel to see your family turn into this like the most hated church and the most hated people like in the country?
Internationally?
Yeah.
Well, guys, to me, it felt like inevitable, because even though they didn't have that national stage, my father had been developing these ideas and developing his, if you will, army for from the time they were infants. And the theology was there, the ability to, the inclination and the ability to draw media attention to himself was there, and had manifested itself in other ways prior to that. It was time.
Yeah, you saw the trajectory as it was just going to get worse and worse and worse, right?
Yeah, I tried to explain this at one point to someone, and it sounded a little bit self-centered or self-aggrandizing, but I always had this in the back of my head that at some point in my life, this is going to turn public, and I'm going to have to be prepared to deal with it, and I was right. It seemed inevitable, because he was such a force of nature, and he was so extreme, and he spent so much time going into just the tiniest nuances of his perception of what the Bible said, teaching all of these, basically his family. Of course, he's going to produce an army of radicals.
Right. Yeah. Of course. And
what else is going to happen? Or you're going to be gone. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So as the, you left early, but many of your siblings and relatives have kind of been shedding out of the church over time, especially somewhat lately.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a community of kind of former Westboro Baptists, or just the Phelps family that you kind of connect to, or, as people leave, is there some kind of, do you guys get together? Do you communicate?
Yeah, I would say that there is that. I know, in fact, Lauren Drain, who was the daughter of one of the other families that became involved, she actually started a program where when someone left, she was basically collecting money, and when someone left, she would send them a little bit of seed money.
That's
I know that there's familial relationships between them, a lot of the second generation, but I would say not so much. See, what you have to understand is that one of the main threads of his theology is to constantly come back to vilifying in detail those who have left, because that's part of the process of controlling the ones that are there, right?
Right.
This is what's going to happen to you. These people are evil, and this is why they're evil, and on and on. So even the most open minds, and we're talking about younger people too, it takes time to process and to mature into greater understanding of the world. So it's good to see, and I have some connections with a few of them, but by and large, most of that relationship is between those younger groups, and it's there to some degree. They're helping each other out.
Well, we part of why we brought you on here today, Nate, was not just to talk about your personal trauma, which I'm sure someday you'd like to stop talking about, but because you're part of a conference that's coming up. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Speaking of trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back in, it would have been in late 2019, a gal named Janice Selby got in touch with me, and she was wanting to put on this conference. She's calling it the Conference on Religious Trauma. and had a bunch of speakers coming in who were specialists or who could speak to that subject of religious trauma. And then COVID happened, so the live conference was canceled. It was scheduled for April of last year. So she's started the process again of setting a virtual conference up online for May of this year. And basically, they've got it just like an all-star lineup of people who have been involved in this, from Daryl Ray, who started recovering from religion back, 15 years ago.
Yeah, Daryl's a good friend of ours. He's terrific.
Yeah. And so what's interesting to me, this religious trauma syndrome is a thing that we're going to see more and more of, and I think it's an important movement overall in the community, because there's so many people who have so many different issues that manifest in so many different ways from their time in religion. And starting with Marlene Winnell's book, Leaving the Fold, that was, to me, that's kind of the cornerstone of, okay, this is a real thing, folks, and we need to start getting a handle on it and figure out how we can codify this and start helping people in real ways so that they can move past. And I just see it getting bigger because more and more people are leaving religion, right?
Yeah, and the terminology is becoming common. I think it was Marlene that coined it, right? That coined the
I think so.
The phrase. And so this, I just looked at the speakers lineup, and this is like a who's who of who's been on the How to Heretic. It's Daryl Ray, Dave Warnock, Dr. Terry Daniel, who's a dear friend, Linda K. Klein, Mandisa Thomas, Marlene Winnell, you. So you can, I think if you feel like you have experienced religious trauma in your life, and you wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you hadn't, probably. So it's probably well worth checking out. And it's called the Conference on Religious Trauma. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, and hopefully people will want to jump in and participate.
Yeah. It's not only about people talking about their experiences where religious trauma developed, but people are talking about who are experts on it as much as one can be at this point. But it's also about trying to start educating and getting more and more therapists out there and people who can help people who have suffered religious trauma. So,
yeah.
Well, I don't know why you think you have any experience with it, but good luck. I mean, just wing it. Just get on there and wing it.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, cool. This has been great. Nate, if people want to find you, where can they find you and your voice?
Well, I'm just on Twitter and on Facebook. Facebook is just Nate Phelps, and then or Nathan Phelps, and then I think it's Innate R Phelps on Twitter. So,
all right, great. Very good. Well, once again, thanks so much, and good luck with the conference.
Well, thanks, you guys. It was great talking to you.